Welcome, welcome. Welcome back to another mini masterclass live on Instagram. I'm actually like a few minutes early, a couple minutes early, but I just wanted to hop on and give everybody a chance to see that we're live. And so our special guest can also join us and we can get going right away. But today I'm very excited to bring back Deann Chase, who is the owner and founder of Chase Law Group. She and I are going to be talking to you about all things employee and contractor. So every single business will at some point in time hire a contractor and or an employee. So this pertains to every single business out there, no matter your industry, no matter your size. If you're a solopreneur, you still may have to hire a contractor, and eventually you'll get to a point where you'll hire your first employee. So this is really good information. It's really good timing because it is going into the end of the year, which means you have 1099s that'll be coming at you. I see she's joined, so I'm just waiting for her little invitation to pop in. But you'll have 1099s coming. If you're an employer, you have W-2s, deadlines coming at you. So we'll talk about all the ways to stay compliant, all the forms, how you can actually or how you're supposed to store them, things, what that means to you, everything you need to know. So I'm excited for this master class. And she's coming in, so I see her now. Hello, hello.
Hello, hello. How are
How are you?
you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Can you hear me okay?
I sure can.
Oh, excellent. Very good. Very good.
Yes. So I was just giving everybody the overview of what we'll be discussing, but I would love for you to reintroduce yourself in case people didn't see our last episode.
Sure. So I'm Deann Chase. I'm a business lawyer from Manhattan Beach, California. So I'm in SoCal. And I've been practicing law for 25 years. I work only with business owners, primarily small business owners and professional practice owners, and help to advise them on all the legal issues that relate to their business. So everything from their business entities, trademarks, contracts, employment, franchise, just a whole broad range of things. And then, of course, our topic for the day is independent contractors.
Yes. And so if you didn't see our episode previously, we talked all things entity selection with Deann. So you can go back on our page and you can find it there. But let's get right into it because we're getting down to 1099 crunch time. And I see so many businesses, and I have seen so many businesses through the years say the same thing. Well, I'm just not going to do it. I'm just not going to 1099 them, or they won't give me the form, or, well, I'm not even sure if they'll reach $600, so, I don't really need it. And we're always coaching that you should get that form, the W-9 form, like literally up front before you pay them a dime, before they do any work with you.
Mm-hmm.
Their vendor contract, their W-9 form. I think sometimes people think I'm just kind of making stuff up as I go. So from a legal perspective, can you talk a little bit about what happens, why people need to 1099, who they need to 1099, and what happens when they don't, or what could happen when they don't?
Well, so, I'm based in California, but of course, and I understand that there'll be people who are listening to this, who are not located in California, right? They're located in other parts of the country. Yeah. But understanding that California currently is one of the strictest states when it comes to how someone is determined to be an independent contractor as opposed to your employee. And for purposes of our conversation, we're going to assume, which it seems to be the case, that the laws that have applied here in the state of California are for all intents and purposes going and already have been promulgated, copied in other states, right? So, so first off, as a business owner, you need to decide and determine right from the start whether or not you are properly classifying someone as a 1099, right? As an independent contractor. Like I hear some business owners, and when I do a new client consultation or what have you, I say, okay, do you have any employees? How many employees do you have? And I've had people say, oh, no, I don't have any employees. I just have, contractors, or what kills me is when people call them contractor employees. Please don't call them a contractor employee. They're either a contractor, which means you have a contract, or they're an employee. Right. And keep in mind, in the state of California, and really as a general rule, the general presumption is that they are your employee first. And so it's really, and for many of my small business clients, they're like, look, I don't want to have an employee because heaven knows, right? Once you have an employee, you have workers' comp insurance. You have, in the state of California, 5 days of paid sick leave. You have employee handbooks and payroll and all that. So, of course, small businesses don't want people to be classified as employees because it's costly and it's expensive. So people try to classify their workers as independent contractors. And in fact, quite often, people who are working as independent contractors sometimes don't want to be employees. But guess what? You don't get to decide, right? The government will decide for you. And if you what's called misclassify, right? If you misclassify someone as an independent contractor who the government determines really is your employee, then there are, penalties and violations and back taxes and a lot of issues that go along with that. So the idea really is to make sure it's done right from the start. Yeah. So I will tell you that we have a few different tests, right? As far as determining who is properly classified as an independent contractor. So in California, and starting in really happened that I was the Dynamex, it was called the Dynamex Operations West Inc. case came through in 2018, and it created a brand new, the California Supreme Court created a brand new test, which is called the ABC test. Yeah, it's the ABC test, right? And it has 3 factors, and you need to meet all 3 factors in order for someone to be considered an independent contractor. So, factor A, the worker is free from the control and direction of the hiring entity, which has always been, and then people are always like, I don't control them, that's what people think that's always, and that's historically the test, but that's just part A.
And controlling them means setting their schedule, telling them when they can and can't work, denying them, their own basically schedule, right? That's part of what you mean by controlling them, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Telling them what to wear, telling them where to be, telling them what time to show up, what time to leave. Yeah, a lot of different factors like that.
Yes. Right. Okay.
So that's part A. Part B is that the worker is performing services that are outside the usual course of business of the hiring party. So I always like a very easy one is you own a yoga studio and you hire a plumber, right? The plumber clearly is providing. So the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business. So in other words, they have their own separate business providing the same services that they're providing to you to other people, right? So, so in other words, you can have your plumber, right? And they have their own, independently established business. And so just kind of on that note, on a little side note, you can have a sole proprietor, right? They don't have their own LLC or corporation. But I say as a general rule that out of an abundance of caution, if you're going to be hiring someone as an independent contractor, you want to make sure at an absolute minimum that person has their own LLC or corporation. Now, and on the other side of it, if you are you want to be considered an independent contractor, then form your own LLC or corporation, because it's just, and it's not legally required. You can have a sole proprietor, but there's more risk, because remember, I represent the business owners, and so there's more risk if you hire an individual, because an individual can make a personal claim, right? They can make a workers' comp claim, they can make an unemployment claim, they can make a wrongful termination claim, they can make all kinds of claims. Whereas,
Yes.
it's it's less, it's more difficult for them to defend if they have a written contract that, that's in the name of their LLC or corporation.
Yes, I say this all the time. The plumber is the exact example I always use. I always say, if I'm an accounting firm, I cannot hire anyone that's doing accounting as an independent contractor, right? Because that's the service that I provide. However, my plumber can be an independent contractor. I always say plumber. That's so funny that you picked plumber too. But that really helps you understand, like, they have to do a completely different scope. If you're a design firm and someone's doing design for you, they should be your employee. Now, like you said, state to state, this is a little bit different, but federally, there are certain tests that are across the board.
Yeah.
And one of the big ones is the controlling of the schedule. If you tell somebody you have to work from this time to this time, or this days to this day, or you tell somebody, you dictate in any way when they do their job, they're not a contractor, they're an employee, correct?
Yes, exactly. And so that's the thing. There are all these other tests. So there is a federal IRS test. So, you have the federal test, and you have the in my state, in the state of California. And so it's called the economic realities test, where they look at factors like, does the worker, who buys the equipment, right?
Right.
And who supplies the materials? And of course, control is always a factor. And does the person invest in the business, or are they just receiving income? And of course, there are other things like, are they paid hourly, and are they paid by project scope and termination? Like, who can terminate? Is it at will? Is it by a contract term? And then there's also skill, like, does it involve does the work involve a particular skill set? So there's the federal test, and then there's, in California, there's the ABC test, right, that we talked about, the 3 parts, and you need to meet all parts. But there are just a broad range of exemptions from that ABC test. So even if you're not able to meet those 3 parts, there's a whole host of different types of tests that apply. And quite often it goes back, in California, it goes back to that whole right to control, right? Mm-hmm. So the right to control, which was based on a case called Borello in the state of California, the right to control test, which had like a lot of the same factors we're talking about, who controls the hours, who provides the equipment, the instrumentalities. Does a person have the ability to hire their own people? Are they paid by the time or the job, and different things? So that's like the Borello test. So in California, if you're not able to meet all 3 of those, there are a lot of different exemptions. For example, if you're a doctor or a lawyer or, some professionals, then you can hire independent contractors. And so I always like to use, there's what I call, and I'm kind of got it on my screen in front of me, but let's see, there are some professional service providers that are exempt under very specific circumstances for marketing and human resources, and there's just huge things. But the one I rely on a lot is what's called the business to business exemption. So, and sometimes maybe if we're not as clear as we'd like to be on that whole ABC test thing, but we really want to do the independent contractor thing, then I say, well, let's look at the business to business test, which is really Borello, the right to control test, plus a bunch of other factors. But essentially what it always comes down to is that the person that you're hiring, has their own business. They have their own entity. There's a written contract. Like every year I talk to my clients, and I have, I offer corporate packages so they keep up with all their corporate minutes and all that fun stuff. And every year I offer a complimentary consultation. So I was just talking to a client this week, and they have a moving company, right? Moving and storage. And he said, yeah, we don't really want to do the whole employment thing. So we had our workers form entities, which a lot of businesses will do. And I said, okay, but do you have a written contract? Because usually they call me when they would do their contracts, and I didn't do one of those. So I'm like, well, do you have a written contract with them? And he goes, oh, no, we just pay them. I'm like, no. If you have someone that you want to call an independent contractor, then you want to be sure that you have a written contract. And the fact that you have the contract in and of itself does not make that person an independent contractor. But right. It's one element. It's one of the elements is, does the person know that you're hiring them as an independent contractor? So it's notice to that person. And what I always like to do is I like to include the elements of the exemption that I'm relying on in the contract itself. So that then if you're sitting, and I've had this happen where I've been in California before an employment, like an administrative law judge, right? And you have someone who's making a claim as an independent contractor, like unemployment, for example. The person makes a claim for unemployment. You as the business say, well, they're not entitled to unemployment because they're an independent contractor. But then you end up before a hearing, before a judge who automatically sees everybody as employee. That contract is like, it's like Exhibit A. And in that contract, it says, oh, this person said that they were in business for themselves. This person said that they have their own business license. This person says that they do work for others. And so I put it in the contract so that then they're signing, yes, I'm in business for myself. Yes, I control everything and all those sorts of things. So
I actually have the exact two examples you just gave experience with both of those things. I had a customer who called her independent contractor a contract employee.
I see it all the time.
So that person then, when she said, we no longer need your services, went to file for unemployment. Because in her mind, she was an employee because she'd been told, you're our contract employee. And even though taxes weren't coming out of her check, and even though she didn't get a pay stub, it didn't register that she wasn't an actual employee. She just really didn't know or didn't understand. So she went and filed for unemployment. That prompted an EDD audit of my customer because EDD, which is the state of California's Employment Development Department, they were like, where's all the payroll tax? Where's the unemployment tax? Where's all the money from this employee if that she's been working all this time, right? So they cited immediately with the employee. They didn't give the business owner the benefit of the doubt. They went straight to audit, and here we assess that you owe at least $35,000 in back taxes, fines, penalties, and interest, right? Yeah. So my customer had to go through the process of proving that this person, in fact, qualified as an independent contractor, and she did not have any of those things you just mentioned in place. So it was so hard for her to do that. Yeah. And she had to go to bat for herself. I mean, it took months and months and months of her time and so much money. In the end, she ended up settling for $10,000. So this cost her $10,000 instead of 30 something, but still she settled for $10,000 because she was so over trying to go through the process of disputing it. Now, that wasn't done with any kind of ill intention. It was just a check mark on a freaking form that made all of this happen.
Well, and to that point, to that point, before you move on, let me just say that is actually very, very common. And in fact, the Employment Development Department is deliberately trying to trick these people into outing, if you will, the people who are hiring them as independent contractors. And so that is where I see these relationships come to the viewpoint of a governmental agency, is that unemployment claim situation. So many times, it's very, very common. And like you said, even the person who's making the claim is not intentionally trying to target the person that hires. Completely, quite often, very unintentional. They don't, like you said, they don't know any better. They just said, well, I'm not working, so I'm going to try and get unemployment. And the EDD says, who did you work for last? Right? And then they go, oh, I work for so-and-so. And they're not even thinking about it sometimes either. And then ding, 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 ding. Now you have the EDD doing an audit. So I just want to point out that that's very, very common.
Well, I've seen it already. And then I had another customer who actually did have their vendor agreements, did have their W-9s, did issue their 1099s, got a random audit, just random. They didn't do anything wrong to trigger it, right? Just, it was their luck of the draw.
Yeah.
And in their vendor contract, they stated in 3 different places that their independent contractors were required to show up on specific dates for a specific type of an event.
Mm.
And they got dinged for $18,000 because the EDD determined that these people didn't qualify as contractors because they're required, like you said, any control of when you have to come and when you have to show up. So they had to go through that whole mess. And it's just goes to prove, like, you have to do it right, because if you don't do it right, you are going to put yourself in a position of exposure, and everybody thinks it's never going to happen to me, and it doesn't relate to my business, and I'm too small, nobody's going to care. But the small businesses are the ones making all the mistakes because they're not hiring Deann Chase to make sure that they've done everything correctly.
No, it's really true, because, you know, they don't, sometimes they just simply don't know any better. And, you know, there is that old adage, ignorance of the law is no excuse, right?
Exactly.
And
that's why we're bringing
really
this series
true
to our customers. Yes.
Yes. And
it's exactly
so,
why we're doing this for people.
Yeah. And every chance I get, because as a business owner, you're like, wait, I can't even tell someone what time to show up. Like, if I'm having an event that starts at 5 o'clock and I'm hiring a vendor, my vendor agreement should be able to say, show up at 5 o'clock, because hello, that's when the event starts.
When it is. Yes.
You show up at 10 o'clock, we don't have a vendor to serve, you know, to cater. Right. So that's not the only factor. And so I think that, but yeah, if you're telling them to, if you're requiring them to show up at a meeting, like you're saying, okay, yeah, we're going to show, you know, the event starts at 5 o'clock. You know, you need to show up at 4:30 because we're going to have a meeting where you need to say, well, first off, you know, that you have to pay them for that meeting, of course, but then, so things like that, that's where you get into trouble. If you just say, you know, if you're hiring a caterer, you know, you say the event starts at 5 o'clock, and then the caterer tells you, and that's another thing too, is when you're hiring someone as an independent contractor, the concept is they have their own business, right? So they should really be giving you a contract to sign, right? If you think about you hire the caterer, and the caterer gives you a contract that says, we'll show up at this time, we'll have this many people. You really shouldn't have to give them the contract to sign. But oftentimes, and particularly if you're hiring these small businesses, they don't have those contracts. So I like I said, I draft these, I call them services agreement, by the way. Like, people call that, like, people title the documents independent contractor agreement. Hello. Like, let's just not call it to the attention of everybody. Right? Yes. I mean, if you're hiring a vendor, it's a services agreement. It's a consulting agreement, right? And it does include you're hired as an independent contractor and all of that. But yeah.
Another thing I see, and I'd love to touch on, is people who start out the year, maybe they start the first 3 months and they've been paying everybody as a vendor, and then they go, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to have them on payroll. So now this person, they want to switch, and now these same people who were on as a contractor are going to get a W-9 or a 1099 and a W-2 in the same calendar year for the same scope of work. Yes. That's like a major trigger red flag, right? So our advice is always that you need to treat their first 3 months worth of 1099 payments as a cash advance and tax them and put it on the payroll once you convert them. Otherwise, they have to have done a completely separate scope of work. Like, they need to have been your plumber that also all of a sudden had the same skill set that you need as an employee, and they became your employee. In that case, can you give any kind of guidance on what you should do or how you should do it if the same person has worked for both types of forms at the end of the year?
Well, it really is a catch.
No.
It's a catch-22, right? Yeah. Because on the one hand, you don't want to continue to have them as independent contractors just to, like, wait it out till the end of the year, for example, because then you've just dragged it out. So, And
Right.
oftentimes what we'll do, and there are a lot of things, it needs to be very carefully handled.
Yes.
When you're taking someone who's an independent contractor and you're like, oh, my bad. And now you're going to make these people employees, right?
Yes, yes.
And oftentimes what we'll do, because again, there's the government side, right, where you said where there's a random audit or there's an audit gets triggered. But then there's also a little bit of a question on the part of the now employee. We're like, why are they now making me an employee? Maybe I should call a lawyer, right? So maybe I've been misclassified. Oh, wait a minute. So quite often what we'll do is when we're walking our clients through that transition, we'll sometimes say, pay these now employees a little bit of extra and have them sign a release. So
I've had that exact happen too. And I've seen where more and more, especially with things like ChatGPT and Google, there are people who are becoming professional bad employees, and they are learning every single way to get you because they ultimately want your money and not have to work, right?
Yeah.
So I have had an experience with an employee who his employer flipped him. He figured out that meant he didn't qualify as a contractor. He went after the employee for back overtime and he got it. He got overtime. He got all the payroll taxes that were supposed to have been paid. I mean, all the penalties, the fines, everything that went down. It cost that person tens of thousands of dollars. Just because he was trying to skirt having payroll taxes in the first place and having him on board as a 1099 and not really following the proper procedures. He eventually was like, oh, shoot, I should take your advice. But that person, he like picked the wrong guy to do that with. And that person created a huge mess for him.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. But I mean, the bottom line is if you're doing it wrong today, you're doing it wrong tomorrow, right? So you either continue to do it wrong, and by the way, if you continue to do it wrong, knowing you're doing it wrong, then you are willfully violating the law, and those are actually increased penalties for what's called a willful violation of the law. So as soon as you know that you're not doing everything right, there is that concern, like if I transition these people, will I be triggering a lawsuit from those people? And that's why it needs to be carefully handled